When I found out why Daniel really became my friend, I couldn't even cry. The betrayal was so deep, it felt like something inside me just stopped working. I remember that evening like it was carved into the back of my eyelids. The rain was soft, the kind that doesn't soak you, just lingers on your skin. I was standing by the window of my office, lights dimmed, watching the city blur beneath the drizzle. The email sat open on my screen. Just a few lines, but they told me everything. Daniel, the man I thought was my closest friend, the one I trusted like family, wasn't who he said he was. He was investigating me. Not because of anything I'd done wrong, but because I had started investing in a company that his employer considered their biggest threat. At that moment, I couldn't move. My chest tightened. I replayed every laugh, every coffee, every late-night conversation when he told me he believed in me. All of it suddenly feeling like a script, a performance. But to understand how I got there, how I let him in so easily, I have to start from the beginning. 2 years earlier, I was finally in a place I could call steady. I'd built a small financial consulting firm after leaving a big corporation that drained me dry. I wasn't rich, but I had peace. I had time for myself, for my mother who lived nearby, for my morning walks and weekend dinners with friends. My life was quiet, organized in the way you make it after too many storms. My office sat on the 10th floor of a modest building in Karachi's business district. Nothing fancy, just glass partitions, the hum of the AC, and a coffee machine that always sputtered before working. That's where Daniel first walked in. He was introduced by a mutual contact, someone from a client company who said Daniel was looking to invest and wanted guidance. He was about my age, mid-30s, sharp suit but not showy, with an easy smile that made you trust him right away. He told me he'd just moved from Dubai, tired of corporate politics, wanting to start something cleaner, smaller. His words matched my own story too well. We hit it off fast. Too fast, maybe. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became a fixture in my life. He'd drop by the office just to grab a coffee. He'd share articles about startups, or stay late helping me go over client projections. We'd talk about everything, work, family, regrets. I told him about my father, who died when I was in college, leaving behind a small legacy I'd been protecting and growing. He told me about a sister who lived abroad and a mother who'd passed away young. We laughed about our mutual dislike for big corporations. He'd roll his eyes and say, "Those guys are all wolves in ties." I didn't know then that he was one of them. Still, I remember those early months fondly, before I learned what he really wanted. Because back then he wasn't a spy. He was just Daniel. We became close outside of work too. He'd invite me to networking dinners, introduce me to his friends from the industry. He was charming in those spaces, knew when to speak, when to listen. At first, I was cautious. Years in finance had taught me to be, but Daniel had this way of making you feel like you weren't being sold anything. He didn't flatter, he empathized. When he said, "You've got something special here, a deal. Don't let anyone box you in," I believed him. Soon he was more than a colleague, he was my confidant. He knew about my new partnership talks, my small but promising investments, even the long-shot project I was quietly funding. A fintech startup that aimed to challenge the big corporate players. And the irony was, he worked for one of those big corporate players. It started with something small. One morning, I walked into my office and found Daniel sitting at my desk, staring at my laptop screen. He looked startled, almost embarrassed. "Oh, sorry," he said quickly, standing up. "Your laptop was unlocked. I was just checking something for the presentation." I brushed it off. I trusted him. But something about the way he minimized the window, too fast, too nervous, stayed with me. Later that week, I noticed one of my private project folders had been opened. I assumed I'd clicked it accidentally. I wanted to believe that. Then came the questions. Daniel started asking about things that weren't his concern. Not casually, precisely. Like he'd memorized terms from my financial documents. "So, what's your capital exposure in that fintech investment?" he asked one afternoon, while pretending to scroll his phone. I frowned. "You mean the one I mentioned last week?" "Yeah." I was thinking, if it scales, how are you protecting your stake? Do you have silent partners? It was the kind of question only an insider would ask. A competitor, maybe. Not a friend. But I laughed it off, gave him a vague answer. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, this was Daniel, my friend. We had shared meals, secrets, dreams. He'd comforted me when my mother had a health scare. He'd shown up at the hospital with soup and jokes. How could a man who did that possibly have an agenda? But the unease grew. I started noticing he'd stay behind after meetings, or leave his bag in the office overnight. Once, I caught him glancing at my client whiteboard when he thought I wasn't looking. Still, I said nothing. I didn't want to ruin what we had over suspicions. Until the day he slipped up. It was a Friday evening. We were wrapping up a long week, the office quiet except for the sound of rain outside. Daniel and I ordered takeout, and were eating at the conference table, boxes of biryani and cold Coke cans. He asked, too casually, "So, have you decided whether you're going ahead with that investment in FinCor?" I froze. I hadn't told him the company's name. Not once. Not even hinted. FinCor? I repeated slowly. "How do you know that name?" He blinked, just once but enough. His eyes flickered. Then he smiled too quickly. "You mentioned it, didn't you? Maybe I saw it on one of your pitch decks." I shook my head. "No, I didn't." He laughed again, louder this time, waving his hand. "Man, I must be mixing things up. Ignore me. I'm running on no sleep." I laughed too. Pretended to. But that night, I couldn't sleep either. Because I finally knew. Something was off. Deeply off. And I was going to find out what. I didn't confront him right away. I've learned that truth, when it's hiding, needs silence to crawl out on its own. So, I started watching him. The next few weeks, I paid attention. Really paid attention. I began noticing the small, invisible threads I'd missed before. He always seemed to know when I had meetings with investors, even when they weren't on my calendar. He'd bump into people from companies I was talking to. And once, I caught him on a call, whispering something that sounded like, "He's definitely in." When I walked in, he ended the call so fast the screen didn't even lock before he shoved the phone in his pocket. That's when I knew. But still, I needed proof. I started locking my laptop. I began sending myself decoy emails, fake project details that led nowhere. I wanted to see if those details would somehow leak. And they did. 3 days later, I received an unexpected call from a journalist friend. "A deal," he said. "I heard your firm's been approached by FinCor's investors? That's big news. Congrats." My throat went dry. "Where did you hear that?" He paused. "A contact in Synergy Group. Someone said your team's been negotiating with them." Synergy Group. Daniel's old company. The one he said he'd left. That was all I needed to hear. That night, I couldn't go home. I drove aimlessly through the city, headlights blurring in the wet streets, my phone buzzing every few minutes with Daniel's messages. "Hey, you okay? You didn't come by the office today. Call me, brother." Brother. That word made me sick. I parked outside a roadside cafe and sat there, staring at the rain hitting the windshield, trying to make sense of it. Was everything fake? The dinners, the laughter, the advice he gave me when I almost lost that client. Was it all calculated? When you trust someone, you build a version of them inside your mind. Gentle, loyal, human. The truth doesn't just break that image, it burns it. And yet even then, part of me didn't want to believe it. So I decided to set a trap. The following Monday, I went to the office early, before anyone else arrived. I checked the security logs. Daniel had been entering the office after hours several times in the past month. The timestamps were odd, 11:30 p.m., 1:15 a.m. And the access card he used wasn't his own. It was a backup card I kept for emergencies, one only my assistant and I knew about. Someone had duplicated it. I checked the CCTV footage from the night before. The image was grainy, but unmistakable. Daniel, unlocking my office door, carrying a small USB stick, glancing around like a thief. When he turned toward the camera for a split second, I saw his face clearly. Focused. Cold. Not the man who brought soup to my mother in the hospital. That was the moment I stopped doubting that. I sat back in my chair, breathing hard. The air felt heavy, the room spinning. Betrayal doesn't just break trust. It makes you question your own judgment, your own mind. I copied the footage to my drive, closed everything and waited. At 9:15 sharp, Daniel walked in carrying 2 coffees. "Morning," he said cheerfully, setting one on my desk. "Rough weekend?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "Rough." He smiled. "Well, you know me, caffeine and damage control." I looked at him, really looked. The faint stubble on his jaw, the calm in his eyes, like nothing was wrong. Like he hadn't been sneaking into my office to steal my data. I gestured for him to sit. "Daniel, I've been thinking," I said, keeping my tone light. "We should expand our investment circle. Maybe partner with FinCor more directly." His eyes flickered for just a moment. That tiny flash of alertness people can't hide. Then he leaned back. "That's risky. FinCor's volatile." "You sound like someone who knows them well," I said softly. He laughed. "Just what I've read online." I nodded, then turned my laptop toward him. The paused CCTV footage filled the screen. Daniel froze. The color drained from his face. "Recognize this?" I asked. He didn't answer. Or maybe I should call it what it is, corporate espionage. His mouth opened, then closed again. For a second he looked human. Panicked. "Adil, listen. It's not what you think." I stood. "Then tell me what it is." He ran a hand through his hair. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. I swear." "Then what were you doing breaking into my office at midnight?" He sighed, shoulders slumping. "They wanted to know if you were investing in FinCor. That's all. I wasn't supposed to." "They? Who's they?" He hesitated. "Synergy Group. My old firm." "So you never left?" He didn't answer. I felt something inside me harden, not anger exactly. Something colder. "You used me," I said quietly. He looked down. "They offered me a deal. Just to keep tabs. They said it wasn't personal." "Not personal?" I laughed bitterly. "You came to my mother's house. You held my hand when my father's will got disputed. You ate at my table." He opened his mouth again, but I held up a hand. "Don't. There's nothing left to say." I pointed toward the door. "Leave your keycard on the desk." He hesitated, then did as I asked. When he turned to leave, he stopped at the door and looked back. I didn't fake everything, Adil. Some of it was real. I stared at him. "Then that's what makes it worse." He didn't reply. He just walked out. And just like that, 2 years of friendship ended with the soft click of a door. That evening, I sat alone in the office. The city lights shimmered below, cold and distant. I replayed the footage, not because I needed proof anymore, but because I couldn't believe it had happened to me. All those little moments, his advice, his laughter, the way he said, "We're a team, brother." It had all been part of the job. I deleted his number that night. But I couldn't delete the ache. Because betrayal doesn't just come from enemies. It comes from people who once knew your favorite coffee order. For days after Daniel left, the office felt haunted. Not in the ghostly sense, but in that eerie quiet where every object feels like it remembers something. His coffee mug was still in the kitchen. His jacket, still hanging behind the door. Even the faint scent of his cologne lingered near the conference table. I didn't tell anyone what happened, not at first. I needed time to think. I had proof, yes. The footage, the logs, the leaked information. But I also had shame. Shame that I, of all people, a financial consultant who prided himself on reading people, had been played so easily. So I buried myself in work. I showed up early, stayed late, kept my head down. On the outside, life went on. Inside, I was unraveling. But pain has a strange way of sharpening you. The more I thought about it, the more I realized, Daniel's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was strategic. Synergy Group wanted to cripple my growing influence before FinCor could. They'd sent him to get close, to monitor, to report. And I wasn't the only one they'd done it to. It was a Wednesday when I finally decided, enough silence. I called my friend Samir, a lawyer who'd helped me years ago when I started my business. Samir had a calmness about him. The kind that makes you feel like the storm can't touch you as long as he's in the room. "Do you still have connections at the Financial Regulation Board?" I asked. He paused. "Depends who's asking. my friend a deal or my client a deal? Both. He chuckled softly. What's going on? I told him everything, carefully, precisely, leaving nothing out. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end. A deal, he said finally. What you're describing is corporate surveillance. Illegal if proven. I have proof, I said. Then we build a case. But slowly. Quietly. Samir helped me set up a small digital forensics audit. We combed through server logs, emails, and USB traces. Every breadcrumb led back to Daniel's activity, transfers, downloads, even metadata tied to Synergy's servers. He hadn't even covered his tracks properly. That's what struck me the most. How confident he must have been that I'd never suspect him. A week later, I received a notice from one of my clients. They were terminating a partnership. The reason? Conflict of interest concerns. I knew instantly it was Daniel's work. He'd poisoned my name before leaving. That was the moment I stopped being hurt and started being strategic. I drafted an email to Synergy Group's compliance department, copying my lawyer, outlining a potential data breach originating from one of your consultants. I didn't accuse them directly. I just attached the footage, access logs, and email leaks, asking for an internal review. It was bait. Within 48 hours, I got a call, not from Synergy, but from Daniel. A deal, he said, his voice tight. What did you do? I didn't answer. You sent them that footage? You realize they're going to throw me under the bus, right? Then maybe that's where you belong, I said quietly. He sighed long and heavy. You don't get it. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice, I said. You just sold yours cheap. A deal. I hung up. That was the last time I ever heard his voice. Within a week, news broke that Synergy Group was under investigation for corporate misconduct. Several of their consultants, Daniel among them, were suspended pending inquiry. The story made the rounds in the business community. Whispers, rumors, speculation. People who once doubted me now wanted to know my side. I didn't give interviews. I didn't post online. I just kept working. Because revenge wasn't about shouting the truth. It was about letting the truth speak for itself. But even as the dust settled, part of me still wrestled with something deeper. Late at night, I'd sit on my balcony, watching the lights flicker across the skyline. I'd think about how easily trust can turn into a weapon. Daniel had known me better than anyone, my fears, my ambitions, my weaknesses. And he'd used all of it against me. But what haunted me most wasn't that he betrayed me. It was how easily I'd forgiven him, over and over, before I knew the truth. That realization stung more than anything else. A month later, I received a letter. No return address. Just my name, written in neat, familiar handwriting. It was from Daniel. A deal. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't if I were you. I told myself I was just doing a job, but the truth is I did care. You were my first real friend in years. Maybe that's what made me dangerous. I started to believe I could play both sides. I was wrong. I lost everything now. The company. The respect. The only person who saw good in me. If you ever think of me, I just hope it's not with hate. Daniel. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in my desk drawer, and sat in silence. Did I hate him? No. But I didn't pity him either. I'd learned something from that whole ordeal. That trust is sacred, and once broken, it doesn't repair itself. It transforms. It hardens into wisdom. And wisdom, unlike friendship, doesn't betray you. In time, things began to rebuild. The client who'd dropped out reached back after the investigation cleared my name. FinCor went on to become one of the top tech startups in the region. And yes, my investment paid off. But money didn't matter much anymore. What mattered was peace. I'd earned that. And whenever someone new walks into my office now, smiling, confident, eager to collaborate, I take a deep breath, watch their eyes carefully, and remember Daniel. Not with bitterness, but as a lesson. Because betrayal, once it's lived through, becomes your greatest teacher. The weeks that followed were quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a long storm, when you finally realize you've survived it. I didn't celebrate Synergy's downfall, or Daniel's suspension. There was no victory in it for me, only a hollow kind of peace. But something had shifted. Word spread across the corporate circuit. Clients who had once second-guessed my integrity now reached out, almost apologetically. Old colleagues from my previous firm called to say, "We always knew you were solid, a deal." Funny how people believe you again once your pain becomes public. A few months later, I was invited to speak at an industry panel about ethical investment and data transparency. I almost said no. I wasn't one for public attention, but Samir convinced me. "Tell your story," he said. "Not for sympathy, for awareness." So I did. Standing under the bright stage lights, I looked at the crowd, CEOs, analysts, reporters, and for a brief moment, I saw Daniel's face among them. Not really him, just a ghost made of memory. I cleared my throat and began. I once trusted someone who saw my kindness as a weakness. Someone who thought friendship was a convenient disguise for ambition. And for a long time, I blamed myself for not seeing it sooner, for letting him in. But betrayal doesn't mean you were foolish. It means you were human. The room was silent. I could feel their attention, that sharp, collective stillness. I continued. I learned that transparency isn't just a business value. It's a personal one. Protect your data, yes, but more than that, protect your heart. Because once trust is broken, it's not your fault for having it. It's their loss for wasting it. When the panel ended, several people approached me. Young entrepreneurs, investors, even a few who admitted they'd gone through something similar. One man said quietly, "It's strange how the people who hurt us the most are often the ones who smiled the kindest." I nodded. That's what makes betrayal feel personal, because it is. A week after that event, I received another letter. This time it wasn't from Daniel. It was from a Synergy executive, a formal apology. They admitted to unethical intelligence practices, expressed regret for the actions of a former consultant, and offered a settlement for damages. I didn't accept the money. Instead, I donated the amount to a startup mentorship program, a small effort to help honest people build without fear of manipulation. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. My life looks different now. I still run my firm, but I've learned to keep things smaller, simpler. My team is like family. I know their hearts as much as their skills. We talk openly, we share meals, we trust, but carefully. Trust now has boundaries, and that's not cynicism. That's wisdom earned. My mother often says, "Pain carves space inside you for better things to grow." She was right. Losing Daniel made room for better people. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about him. Not with hate, not even anger, just a quiet understanding. Maybe he thought he was doing what he had to. Maybe guilt followed him in ways I'll never know. I hope he finds peace too, not as a friend, but as a man who finally understands what he destroyed. Because in the end, betrayal changes two people. The one who's betrayed, and the one who does the betraying. One becomes wiser, the other emptier. Now, whenever someone asks me how I survived that chapter of my life, I tell them this. Survival isn't about revenge or exposure. It's about refusing to let betrayal turn you into something you're not. I didn't stop trusting people. I just learned who deserved it. And maybe that's what life really is. A series of lessons disguised as heartbreaks. So if you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, someone you trusted like family, I hope you remember this. Your heart is still good. Don't let their deception make you smaller. Because even after everything, I still believe in goodness. Not because of what people do, but because of what I choose to be. Would you have forgiven him? Tell me in the comments. And if my story reminded you of your own, don't forget to subscribe for more true stories like this one. Sometimes healing begins just by knowing you're not alone.